everybody to our webinar series, A Future by Design. We are really excited to bring a wonderful panel to you today. So let me introduce them to you. Our guests are Naveen, Jain, business executive, entrepreneur, philanthropist, author, absolute long-term friend of Singularity U, board director and faculty chair of Space and Entrepreneurship. Thank you so much for joining us, Naveen.
Christina, it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And Lisa Andrews, my co-CEO at Singularity U Australia, CEO of Wavia, and actively working on solving humanity's grand challenges. Hello, Lisa.
Hi, everyone.
And Anuraj Gambhri, an innovation catalyst, disruptive techpreneur, and thought leader, educator, and a future maker. Hi, Anuraj, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Christina. Great to be
So
here.
I would love to start with my absolute favorite topic, which is utopia. And Naveen, I'm going to throw to you first. What is for you utopia? How do you see utopia?
So I think the utopia is, in my mind, is a place where every one of us can actually be whatever we want to be, create a world that we imagine. So to me, a utopia is a world of our imagination, and whatever we imagine, it exists there in that world.
And imagination is such a wonderful thing. Anuraj, how does your imagination play into utopia?
Well, I think it's really this entity of what I call the bliss mode, which is how we can achieve ourselves in that true state of, true conscious happiness. And I think that's really where I see that convergence of technology and humanity coming together.
Lisa, utopia for you is?
Oh, my MTP, massive transformative purpose, is to give everyone a fair start in life and maximize human potential at each stage throughout life. So it really is about the human and how we can be our best selves every day.
Wonderful. And just to throw a couple of things in from my perspective, I believe that we all have our own individual attitude, what we want utopia to be. So we all have our individual perceptions of it, which is made up of our experiences. So for me, it's very much a utopia X kind of scenario. And if we live with that kindness, respect, compassion for everybody, then I truly believe that utopia is possible. Naveen, you often speak in terms of the people that you surround yourself with, highlight who you can be. Could you just give us and share with our audience what that actually means to you and how it's played out for you?
And of course, I mean, to some extent, we get shaped by the, people we connect with, people we spend time with. And to us, it's all about the mindset, because your mindset not only defines your thoughts define your actions, and actions changes what you become and what community that you live in becomes, right? So to me, it all starts with the mindset, and the people around you start to shape your mindset. So you're constantly surrounded with the people who are negative and bitter. It's a matter of time until you become negative and bitter. And if you end up surrounding yourself with people who actually want to uplift a community, people who believe that each one of us has a potential to be able to change the trajectory of how humanity is going to live, and you surround yourself with people who believe in the exponential technology, they believe the confluence of exponential technology can change the way people live their lives. And guess what happens? One day we all come together and join the future by design, because we know if we can if we can imagine our future, we can create our future. And to me, that imagination is the only limit that we have to what we can create, and our imagination creates our utopia.
And could you give us some examples of how that's played out for you in your life? Because I know I've listened to many webinars that you've given, read books that you've contributed to or written yourself. How has that played out for you? Can you give the people that are listening an example of how they might find that for themselves?
Now, I have to admit that, I always thought that I actually thought that was things that were slightly ahead of their time, until I actually became part of Singularity University. And then I realized that my thinking was so limited. What could be there? So to me, I have now known Peter Diamandis, the founder of Singularity University, for almost 10 years, right? And literally working with him at X Prize, working with him on the board of Singularity University. And actually, every one of our children actually went to Singularity University EP program. And I can tell you that it's absolutely changed their lives. Being surrounded by the people who believe there's no idea that's crazy enough. Just to, give you an example, like when I was building a company to go to the moon, no one said, "Are you crazy? Wait, nobody goes to the moon." They were asking, so what rocket fuel are you going to be using? Where are you going to be landing? Are you going to be mining this mineral or this mineral? It was given that, of course, you're going to be doing that, right? And they were literally more interested in the details of how you're going to do what you're going to do, rather than, are you crazy that you're going to be doing that? And that, to me, is really the thing, is that nobody ever thought you were too crazy, because the crazies are the ones who end up actually implementing the solutions.
I'm glad that you said that, because we ran our first EP in Australia just last week, and we ran it online because of COVID and border closures, etc. We had a beautiful email on Monday from one of our cohort that said it was remarkable to be in a room where people were as crazy as what I am, and now I know that I'm not the Lone Ranger in that area. So that was, it was very, very much what you're saying, and wonderful to hear that all your children have been to an EP as well. Lester, I know that this is a philosophy that you live by as well. It's the people that you surround yourselves with. Do you want to expand on that concept for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Someone shared with me once that 80% of our thoughts are the same each day if left to our own devices. And so you can imagine the impact that it has on the people that are around you and the thoughts that you share. So for me, I love the saying that you're the average sum of the 5 closest people around you. And I think those thoughts, but I'm also inspired by the mathematical formula of 1 + 1 is more than 2. And so I first went to Singularity University in 2012, and I walked in and there was a sign as soon as you walk in that said, "How will you have a positive impact on 1 billion people in the next 10 years?" And it took me back, and I was, my mind and my mindset, it was just like, I haven't thought of that before. And that expansion seemed impossible for me. And then meeting people like Naveen, like Peter Diamandis, and the people through Singularity University, it's like, wow, I actually feel like this is possible now. And one of my favorite quotes from Peter Diamandis is, 500 years ago, only kings and queens could impact 1 billion people. 100 years ago, it was the industrialists. And today it's you and me. And so that proximity of the people and the conversations that you have, even now I'm getting excited talking to you, Naveen, and Anuraj and Christina, it's like you feel the energy in a room and you share that, and you do really get inspired that anything is possible.
And it is indeed. I remember going to my EP and coming out with very similar feelings as to our cohort last week. It was like, oh my God, I've come home. All my thoughts have been validated. My idea around utopia is spot on. Anuraj, what about you? How do you find the people around you? How do they influence you?
Yeah, I think it's obviously so critical. As the great Buddha said, what you imagine you become. And I think Naveen rightly saying that, it's really finding your tribe. And I really found my tribe at SU, surrounded by great people like yourselves. And I think it was really that connect about moving from talk the talk to walk the talk, and really getting immersed into that exponential mindset is what led me to the journey. And I think it's just been phenomenal.
Can I add I think as well, it's not just proximity, it's also working on big problems. And so it's that purpose and meaning that you get when you're open to what the challenges the world actually has and how you can contribute to solve big problems. And so I know that we're aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals with the United Nations, but I have this vision. And when you look at exponential technologies and what we're going to have access to in the next 10 years, imagine seeing the world like Iron Man, and you've got your own personal Jarvis, and you've got this future of perfect knowledge, being able to find out a big problem that you can contribute to, and then you have your tribe of people surrounded by that you can actually then use technology to solve those problems. It keeps us moving and momentum, and that's what I love.
And I think what Naveen has done with the Moon Express is really redefined moonshots. And I'd love to hear maybe where you're taking that further.
Well, today, if I look at my moonshot, Anuraj, really is about making illness optional. And just to build on what Lisa said, it used to be something that today, we want to understand what's happening in the human body. What do? We literally poke our skin, prick it, drill a hole in it, and draw the blood out of it. Someday people are going to look back at that and saying, oh my God, it's like you're putting a leech on your body and hoping something will come out of it. Right? It is so barbaric. in some sense that how we actually understand what's happening in the human body. Now imagine a decade or 2 decades from here, we're going to have these nanobots in our body, constantly analyzing our body, constantly monitoring our body, constantly repairing the tissues in our body, and literally moving the stem cells from one place to another place, informing our doctor and saying, I think the liver is kind of too damaged here. Can you print a 3D liver? I'll be back there. Or my heart has stopped working now. I'm pumping the oxygen. Don't worry about it. I'm going to take a quick shower here. Print me a 3D heart, and I'll be there in a couple of hours. My point is, all these things that look like a science fiction, they're all going to become the science reality. And that's the reason I love science fiction, because science fiction gives you the imagination of what is possible, right? The idea of a tricorder someday, and guess what? It was in a science fiction 10 years ago, and now the tricorder is a reality. And so you can literally start to imagine a world where being ill, being sick is a choice. And guess what? There is an entrepreneur out there who's going to actually end up creating that world.
It is definitely that science fiction becomes science fact. We're seeing that move at an accelerated rate. So how do we see science fiction? How do we bring science fiction into our idea of utopia? Because I want to start talking in a minute about White Mirror, but how do we see science fiction setting us up for utopia? Naveen, I might go to you first for that.
Well, first of all, the science fiction is really about imagining a world that you actually doesn't exist, right? So the most human beings focus on the world as is, and if you look at the science fiction, they look at the world what it can be. And once you can start to describe the world in those vivid details that you can actually feel it, you can see it. And guess what happens? Then the storytellers start to create that world, and then everyone else can see it, everyone else can visualize it. And then one of us comes along and say, let's go ahead and create that world.
Wonderful. I do have a question for you, and this before we buy into Anuraj and Lisa's idea of science fiction. Why is it in science fiction that we always have to have the baddie as well? Like, I know that it's great when the hero comes bounding in on the white horse, but why do we have to have almost the dystopia to find the utopia, or the Black Mirror to find the White Mirror? Why do we need that, do you think?
Well, we as human beings cannot see, without having a contrast. So imagine if all the background was white, we won't see the human being. It is the contrast between the background and you that allows you to see how beautiful this person in front of you is. If there was a single color, everything just get matched. To me, the bad and a good allows us to see why we don't want to be there, why this world needs to be created. Because if we don't create this new world, we're going to actually get into this abyss that we don't want to be there. So to create a white mirror, you have to have both the attraction and the repel from this bad thing that you don't want. So if you don't have a black mirror, then you can't create a white mirror.
Okay, Anuraj, Lisa, what are your thoughts on science fiction becoming science fact? We're using science fiction to draw us into a utopia. Thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I think it's really obviously the path that we've taken on in Singularity U. And as Naveen talked about the tricorder, I've got it right here. I mean, it's as a prototype, and we've seen technology, exponentially grow so fast that we just finding it very hard to keep up and to apply it in the right way. And I think that's where we see that diversion happen towards a darker side of it. But it's really finding that true, deeper meaning is what we're on the quest for humanity. And I think that's what White Mirror. It's really about creating that better universe by the accelerating technologies and adapting it to the UN SDGs.
I had this epiphany about that our superheroes and fairy tales from when we were younger, they're actually, we can have superpowers now with exponential technology. And looking at that, like Iron Man with Jarvis, it's AI, and it's, these superpowers that we actually can have as humans now. And so how do we get inspired by some of these movies? And for me, I was like, if I was going to be a superhero character, who would I be? I totally love Captain Planet. He's our hero. We grew up with these great memories, and you feel the emotion when you think about it. So I was like, oh, I'd be like Astro Girl, then Iron Man, because I totally love Jarvis, and Rocket Boots, amazing. But then a Care Bear. I'm like, how do we like totally like Care Bear stare on the world? And I think that inspiration, so, you know, science fiction becoming science fact, it's like it helps your mind get into that creative state of we can actually utilize technology in that way and the visualization into the future. And so there's such an incredible, important place. Then how do we actually teach people about exponential technologies is important, and then what the world needs to then focus their attention on that. And I think there's always a supervillain in any superhero movie, and we've been thinking about, you know, what are the world's current supervillains? We've got Plastic Man, there's COVID Man, you know, how do we visualize them? And then, you know, like any sci-fi, really good sci-fi movie, the heroes always win in the end. And I think that can be applied in real life. So Naveen, what are your favorite superhero characters from when you were young?
Well, I was going to say it would be very remiss of me if we didn't ask Naveen who his superheroes were, given that we're going to have a superhero theme at our summit. So Naveen, your superheroes.
I felt that Superman was my superhero. And the reason was just, I love the idea of flying like a bird and just to be able to go from one place to another place. And the other thing I would love would be a teleporter. You know, beam me up, Scotty. I mean, you know, how could you not? Like suddenly you're cold in Seattle and you can just beam yourself up in Sydney. And, you know, here you are in a beautiful summer in Sydney, right? So to me, that would be just an amazing if we can create a teleporter and to be able to fly like a bird, like a Superman. I think that'll be just so amazing.
Love it. Anuraj, your superheroes.
Oh, well, I also actually like Superman quite a bit. And I think Astro Boy is something I used to watch a fair bit earlier. But I think it's those three traits when we talk about omnipresent, omniscient, which is knowing everything, and omnipotent, ultimate power and influence. And I think how Lisa talks about the future of perfect knowledge, that whole space coming together. And when Naveen talks about the superpowers, you know, with Superman, I think it's really all of that coming together in that form, which is what we need to imbibe. Yeah.
And I'd like to suggest to people in the chat too, if they would like to ask some questions, and we're happy to take questions as we go through the webinar as well. So we're talking about utopia, talking about where we want to take things, using imagination, moving towards something that pulls people into the concept of utopia rather than a dystopia. Anuraj, we've been working for quite some months now on the concept of white mirror. For those people that are listening that don't know what white mirror is, could you give us a brief description?
Yeah, sure. So like I was saying, the purpose of White Mirror is to curate a better universe, a future for us, by accelerating technologies, adapting it to help attain the UN SDGs. And this would be achieved by having participants opt in to a positive future that they want to create or co-create, to remove psychological barriers of disbelief, and using the current state of accelerating technology trends to envision those utopias rather than dystopias painted by mainstream media, such as Black Mirror, Westworld, Brave New World, and so forth. But I think it's really the manifestations of so many different forms. I think it's a phenomena that's been happening for so long already, and we've all been part of it. But the trigger really happened, of course, with COVID and many other key milestones that I've seen in my own career with technology and spirituality coming together. But it's really how do we bring that to a manifestation that is very meaningful and formulated so that it becomes actionable for everybody.
So there's a question, Naveen, I'm not sure if we can answer it just yet, but Peter asks, if we were to create an episode of White Mirror and you were the central character, what would the storyline be?
I think it will be it'll be very similar to the world I'm creating with Wyoming, which is really an episode where it would say, imagine a world where being sick is a choice. That means everyone understood exactly what's happening in their body, what actions they can take to prevent their grandmother from having an Alzheimer, not watching their uncle die from cancer, and all this, terrible diseases that we as humans should never have to suffer. I mean, I still really go back and saying 10 years from now, our children are going to look at us as how primitive caveman or cavewoman we were, that we watched our loved ones die from cancer because we couldn't do anything, or we watched our loved ones die from heart attack because we just didn't know what to do. These things will be thing of the past, and they're going to be asking us, what kind of primitive world were you living in, Dad, where these things just happen and you didn't do anything? And at least I would have a satisfaction of saying, look, I did create Viome that did help you prevent and intercept these chronic diseases. And it doesn't mean once we solve all these problems that we are going to somehow run out of problems to solve. And I think as you and I were talking last time, to me, one of the biggest problems that I think we need to solve is the same thing that happened in the communication. We used to have a low bandwidth communication using modem, the 300 baud modem. Christina, you're way too young to remember them, but people used to dial into the modems, right? And that was such a low bandwidth. And then we suddenly came up with these, the band with broadband, and now we have this massive broadband where it doesn't matter what part of the world you are in, whether you have satellite links, and now you have the low Earth orbit. Everybody in the world is going to be connected with the broadband. Now imagine, it's still you and I are communicating our thoughts using a low baud, something called speech. I mean, I can barely speak couple of hundred words a minute, even though I speak really fast. Imagine a broadband communication that's one to many. And suddenly, all my thoughts are communicated to everyone who is actually listening to this instantly. And I can subscribe to people's brain. So I can say, hey, Peter Diamandis, can I just subscribe to your brain? I'm going to upload everything go learn something more, and I want to upgrade every month to my brain. So, and now I can subscribe to Ray Kurzweil's brain. And I don't have to spend 4 years sitting in a class learning from a professor instead of just uploading their brain in a second, and boom, I have all that skill. And I have unlimited neocortex up in the cloud. My brain is connected to the cloud, and all those wonderful problems that our children and grandchildren will be solving.
We've just had a new business formed in the chat. So we've got Brain as a Service, and one of our faculty, Tim Boyle, has already used the word BAS as its name. So we're developing a business as we go, everybody. Lisa and Anuraj, do you have any comments on what Naveen said? So for me, telepathy is something I would love to see, telepathy and teleportation. So let's go T squared. Your thoughts, Lisa, on what this might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm already visualizing the amount of thoughts that I'm going to be able to consume, and how we can actually apply that. So have I been transported into the matrix? Is that how it's happening right now? We're like superimposing information on our expanded neocortex, and whatever it is that you need. Is it I want to do kickboxing today, and automatically I know how to do that. It raises an interesting question when we're talking about proximity as well and creating a utopian future, is how do we actually have that secure connection, but then tune into the right river of information? And I love the concept of information as food. And so if you actually think about the diet that you're consuming, typically people structure what they eat. And I absolutely recommend Viome. If you haven't done it already, please go and do it, because structuring what you eat, it can make such a big difference. But then have a think about that of information. How are you actually having a healthy trolley is a healthy body when you're at the supermarket? How are you having a healthy trolley of information? And if you're subscribing to a Brain as a Service subscription, are you actually subscribing to the right thoughts from the right people? So yeah, that's I'm totally getting excited about that already. Naveen, I'm subscribing to your Brain as soon as you put it online. Just so you know.
Lisa,
fangirl here.
Likewise. I can already feel your love. So there you have it. Telepathy is working.
Yes.
Anuraj, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think we've already seen the bidirectional BMI, the brain-machine interface, go through so much of potential growth. And with Neuralink, for example, which Elon Musk has recently showcased with the 3 little pigs and the demos that we've been looking at, how do we control the motor cortex and so many other entities. But I think your area of telepathy, what we're really seeing is the neuro states that we really subscribe to. It's the theta stage, which is at 4 to 7 hertz, where we can really tap that intuition, the purpose, the conscious healing elements. That I think is really where we can head to so interestingly. And again, tap into those aspects of brain states from the global consciousness level. It'll be so exciting.
So question, will communication in White Mirror happen telepathically? Naveen, I'd like to go back to Viome and just discover what that journey looked like, because I actually can see another White Mirror episode in just the discovery around Viome as well, or the prequel to the solving the health challenges that you were just talking about before. How did you dream up Viome? How did you then put it into reality? So, you know, ideation without execution is hallucination. How did you take it from the idea that you had into the action that it is now?
Well, first of all, I think, Christina, there is a framework that I use every time I start a company. And I think you and I chatted about that, you know, like, why this, why now, why me? And why this is the first thing you have to ask yourself. God forbid if I'm actually successful in solving this problem. And as Lisa said, would it actually help 1 billion people live a better life? And in this case, and I say, what if you can imagine a world where no one will ever have any chronic diseases? And imagine your aging is a chronic disease, because there is no reason for us to age or die. I mean, if you really think about it, I don't understand why is it that people believe that humans are born and humans must die. I mean, just don't understand the concept. Where does that come from? Is there a limit to how long can we live? Is it really 100 years? Why is it the turtles can live to 300 years, so the whales can live to 500 years? What is it about our body? The answer is absolutely nothing. There is no reason we actually couldn't live as long as we wanted to live. But the point I'm trying to make really is that I thought the one thing that we can absolutely prevent is chronic diseases, because there's fundamentally no reason for us to be chronically sick, because these are the what I would say diseases of the choices we make every single day. So that was our purpose, was to see, can we actually prevent and intercept chronic diseases? And to me, the timing was really good, which is why now was the confluence of the cost of sequencing coming down, the confluence of cost of processing coming down, and the AI becoming powerful allowed us to solve, digitize, decode, and decipher the human body. And I think the last part was really that, really looking at the world slightly differently, what everyone else has in the past has looked at. Everyone was focused on looking at the genes, and my thinking, coming from the naive world of non-biological person, was, look, your genes don't change when you develop a chronic diseases, and what changes is the gene expression. What if we can measure gene expression? And just that simple thinking allowed me to find the right team of people who helped us find how to measure gene expression, a brilliant people who could analyze this data through AI, and a team of people that could actually decode the data through translational science. And that's literally how we built this company. To me, the best way to do that, Christina, if I can just take another 30 seconds on that, is that anyone who's listening to it, is because I want to give them something so simple. If you can come up with something that is so audacious, something that is so purposeful that everyone who listens to your idea want to contribute to it, that means if it's easier to do an audacious project than to do a smaller project, because the best and the brightest in the world want to work on the toughest problem. The best and the brightest want to have a legacy, and they want to solve a big problem. And once you do that, you assemble a great team. And once you assemble a great team, because they all want to contribute to this great audacious idea, all the venture capitalists want to invest in you because you have the best team out there. And suddenly the things that was simply a dream suddenly becomes a reality, because now you have manifested your imagination into something real.
I love that. And that is a perfect segue into my question for Anuraj, because with White Mirror, what we have managed to do, Anuraj, is assemble quite a brilliant and very diverse team. How did that come about? And then I'd like to ask the panel, there's a bit of a controversial question that has come through in the chat. Rowan, I'm gonna put your question to the panel, but Anuraj first, given that Naveen has just led us brilliantly into the gathering of the great team that allows people to buy into the idea, how did that happen for you?
Well, I think it was just the serendipitous moments, really. And I think being part of the tribe here at SU, and I would say really, I'd really like to thank Peter Zing quite a bit, who was meant to be with us right now. But he's been a key proponent to take it and catalyze it even further with a team locally And then with the extended team that I've actually managed to attract from global audiences, from burners, people who've created Burning Man experiences for the last 10 years. So VR enthusiasts, creative artists, philosophers, filmmakers, I think all the great team that we are very honored to have together, who's working on these great episodes that we have. And what we're really looking at is a future museum is one of the early settings where we're going to have these superheroes and the superpowers that we can sort of manifest and get everybody to sort of enact their own co-creation of their superhero. And what we're looking at is immersive experiences through virtual reality, very highly connected, and then also products. So white mirror product type scenarios. We've also been taking moonshots or Mars shots rather with taking white mirror retreats in nature, because forest bathing and I think that immersiveness with blue zones of the world type thinking, and also theme parks potentially in the future. So I think we're dreaming big like Naveen talks about. And I think it's those audacious goals that will hopefully make us go somewhere together.
And Naveen, we'd love to actually talk to you about that episode. Right now, I'd like to go to Rowan's question. So Rowan's, he starts with a statement, seems like the beginning of another Black Mirror episode. We are barely able to deal with social media right now. How do you think we'll be able to cope with the stress? And at the time that he wrote that question, we were talking about telepathic communication, opening up, being able to download people's brains immediately. So how do you think we'll be able to cope with such stress? Does anybody have a response to Rowan's question?
In my opinion, the stress comes from the expectation, the gap between the expectations and the reality, right? So if you only get stressed because you're expecting something to happen and it doesn't happen because reality is different. So to me, the best way to do that is to actually create your expectations and meet that expectation so there is no stress, right? And secondly, it is not something or someone that stresses you. It is you actually stresses yourself. And so fundamentally, one has to realize the happiness, anger, frustration, all these things are actually manifested by you, not blaming, Christina, you make me angry. No, I make myself angry. That is the fact, right? And that same thing comes from the happiness. I make myself happy and I share that happiness with the world, but nobody in the world can make me happy or unhappy, right? So now going back to the stress, I really feel that there are two purposes. One is that if you have the right nutrition in the body, that keeps the right mental balance. And if you keep the philosophy that I come from, the Eastern philosophy that Anuraj would actually understand, which is that there are only two types of things that happen in my life: the things that I have control over and the things I don't have control over. And the way I look at my life is I never worry about the things that I don't have any control over, because I think it is what it is and it will be what will be. And I never worry about the things I do have a control over, because I know I am doing the best I can possibly do given the information I have, and it is what it is and it will be what will be. That means I focus on actions, not on the outcome. And the stress comes on focusing on the outcome, not on the actions. If you want to get rid of the stress, focus on action, not the outcome.
I love that. And I know that mental health is such a hot topic at the moment. And for me, I had a couple of distinctions. Was that depression was fear of the past and being in the past and not being able to change it. And then anxiety was fear of the future. And so that's one concept. It's like, how do you reframe the anxiety to be excitement, or what do you need to do to be able to feel okay and comfortable with what's happening? But then the second thing and tool that I love to use is where you're actually spending your mental energy and your mindset. Is it in the past? Is it in the present? Or is it in the future? And so how do we actually draw a line? You can't live in the past. You can't spend your mental energy in the past. It's never going to be good for you. And then, so if it's present or future, I love the moonshot thinking and is in the future, and then the present of actually being able to synthesize any positive and negative and move forward as a true leader. And so the formula for me that I was running by was 50% in the future and 50% in the present. And one thing that I realized when I wasn't well and the present wasn't all that great, and I know a lot of people, 2020 hasn't been great for people, was that I went to the future. We're going to change the world. And it was amazing. But then, I'm not showing up for myself first. And so I think a couple of those things of people being able to check in and understand where they're at in their life. And like you say, Naveen, with health, it's like, you know, if you actually are really healthy, then typically you're coming from a much better place. And a little bit of background there. So I've had 2 kidney transplants in my life. And so the last one was 3 years ago, and I'm really healthy. I've got 100% kidney function now, and so fantastic. And I dream about in the future we'll be able to 3D print a kidney and using our own DNA so that, you know, there's no anti-rejection or immunosuppressant medication. And so showing up for yourself is so important when we're talking about stuff like this.
It was very interesting also during the EP, because I've been thinking about that present, past, future since we had an Indigenous elder, Uncle Paul Gordon, who gave us a talk about the past, the present, and the future. And he gave an example. He said, every time I click my fingers, the present goes into the past. So how important is the present in our lives? How important is the past, and what emphasis do we put on the future? So that has really been, that has changed my perception on past, present, and future just in the last few days since Uncle Paul Gordon put that to us. Naveen, when we had a conversation, pre-webinar conversation, we were talking about Hippocrates and some of the messages that he gave us. Can you share with the audience some of the conversation we had around that?
Yes, and I think, one of the interesting things is that if you look at today, people quote Hippocrates saying that, do no harm. But what people and all the doctors and medical doctors forget is the 2 other things that he said. First was, all diseases begin in the gut. That means literally our health and our life and who we are actually is in our gut. And I'm going to give you some of the very latest research on that. And the third part that he said was, let food be thy medicine, let thy medicine be the food. And that to me is the key. The food is not simply a thing that actually is to fill our stomach. Food is the medicine. Food actually is the information that transforms our computer. We call that gut. And the food gets modified into the set of output information that our body absorbs, and it changes what it becomes. And today it is so clear that, in fact, just last week, there was a research that came out that our gut actually causes the Alzheimer's disease, the cancers, the heart diseases, the obesity and diabetes and autoimmune diseases. And all of these diseases are simply happening because we as human beings are an ecosystem. And for some reasons, we have always believed it was something unique about that human DNA, and all other things that are in the body, they are a parasite, and we must kill every bacteria, every virus, without realizing that there are 39 trillion of them that are living in our gut, and trillion of them that are living in our mouth. And we are literally a walking, talking ecosystem. And if you were to look at the universe from the perspective of the organisms, there are many 100 trillion more of them than us. We are the parasite in their world. They are not a parasite in our world. And you could argue they may have created us as a portable container to carry them around. So when we poop, we actually are spreading them, which is exactly what their purpose was. So we are, in some sense, a beautiful portable container for these microorganisms. They control our behavior. So there is, in fact, a research that shows not only the depression and anxiety, they in fact control our behavior, our mood, our anxiety, our addictions. So they took 18 people who were addicted to alcohol, and they gave them a fecal transplant, which is a microbiome transplant, and their addiction to alcohol went away. They did the fecal transplant on kids who had autism, and their autism symptom went away. So now I'm starting to think about that, how our gut and the microbes and our thing changing our brain, impacting our brain. And in fact, they could be the puppet master simply pulling the strings, and we are simply following like a puppet. So could our human brain is just a puppet to these puppet masters? So think about that for a second.
I love that. And I just had the image of being in a science experiment at school, and we actually pulled out, it was gross, I'd never do it now because I'm a vegetarian and I'm an animal lover, but one of the experiments was to pull out the intestines of a rat. And then when I studied later on anatomy and physiology and had a look at how the brain was formed, the similarities between the brain gut, if you like, and the gut are quite similar. And I know there's some work done in M-braining at the moment about the whole head brain, heart brain, gut brain relationship and its relationship to NLP. So it's a fascinating subject, and we continue to find out more and more information.
I mean, so our gut and brain are connected, and gut and skin are connected. So we're now finding that once you fix the inflammation in the gut, your acne goes away, your eczema goes away, and the psoriasis goes away. So not only gut and the brain, the gut actually connects to our immune system, and 70% of our immune system is along our gut lining. And when your immune system is not inflamed, all these diseases that we are talking about are simply the symptom of inflammation. So when you reduce the flame and the inflammation in the gut, all these inflammatory disease just fundamentally go away. And we can talk a lot more about that, because to me, it is the key to the human health. The people have to understand that food is a medicine. And once you understand there is no such thing as universal healthy food, somehow the spinach and kale and broccoli and Brussels sprout are good for you, that's a misnomer. Because those were exactly the thing, Christina, that was actually causing me to have inflammation in my body and keep the weight on. And when I got rid of things like spinach, kale, and Brussels sprout and broccoli, temporarily, suddenly I started to lose weight. I have more energy. And my wife was completely different. So in some sense, every individual is different and it changes. So in a sense that when I did the test 6 months later, it says now I can eat spinach, but it's still not broccoli. And I'm quite sure as we go along, our body is constantly changing and adapting. The foods that were good for you become bad for you, and things that were bad for you can become good for you. So it really is an adaptive body, and we have to constantly listen to it.
So let's bring this back round. We're talking about the gut. We're talking about technology that has allowed us to discover more about the gut, which very much relates to one of Rowan's questions and comes back to Utopia and White Mirror, Anuraj and Lisa. We already, so the question is, we already know that mindset can be controlled. Is tech really the answer? So given that we know so much about technology, given that Anuraj, you know, the work that you've done with Muse and all the other devices, so open that up to you all. Is tech the answer?
Well, I think that's a great question, because this is something when I first met His Holiness Dalai Lama, he was quite skeptical about technology. And actually, when I was presenting to him about some great solutions of wellness and well-being through technology, it took a little while to get over that barrier. And I think it was really when we talked about how do we flip, not by switching off, but switching it to, as I was saying earlier, the bliss mode, or something where we can get people aligned by using technology just as a stepping stone, as really the means to get there, but not getting lost in there itself. So I think there is so much happening in tech right now. It becomes definitely a means to help you get there, but one should not get carried away with it, for sure. And that's what we really trying to use for tech, for storytelling, for immersing into our own bodies, and like what Naveen has done through Wyom, it's really tech, and I think it's about that brain, heart, gut coherence. So when we enable all our different states to find that true happiness, and I think just touching on the previous point, there's a great saying which Naveen was alluding to: it's difficult to find happiness within ourselves, but it's impossible to find it anywhere else. So it's how do we use tech to enable us getting there to that point.
I want to bring it back to a comment, Naveen, that you made earlier as well, is in the future, we'll look back at some of the practices that we're doing now and see them as so primitive. And so with this future of perfect knowledge, and when we're going to be able to know anything, anywhere, anytime, and whether that be devices or sensors, we'll be able to then solve bigger problems. And I think, as you say, it relates to the way our mindset and our happiness and how we show up. And information really is power. And so science and technology absolutely, I believe, is the answer. It's how we use it, and it's a tool, and the intent behind the tool. And if the intent is to help us show up as our best selves, where we're actually contributing to the world on a different level, then how beautiful. And I do actually, just to add on, I've got a question relating to the technology, and I love Vyome gives us an opportunity to be able to check in of what we should be eating on a regular basis. And it's this tool that we can use in our homes. Do you see, you mentioned fecal transplant. Do you see that as a therapy or a way that we're going to be able to treat different diseases in the future?
Well, first of all, I mean, that is a very crude way of doing the things we do because, to me, a fecal transplant is literally taking someone's everything that they have and, essentially transplanting it in you. So you inherit all the types of things they may have. So when you do a fecal transplant, it's quite possible that a person you're getting it from may be depressed and you inherit the depression, or you may inherit obesity, you may inherit a bunch of other things with that. To me, it will be more in the future, will be more surgical in a sense that we'll be able to modify our gut microbiome in a very surgical way. So we can use the phages to say, we don't want that thing there, we don't want this thing here, and to be able to actually create the things just for you. So in some sense, having a designer gut, just like having a designer baby, then having a designer mind. And to me, I think just to expand on this idea of how we as humans are so limited by our sensors and by our processing power, right? So if you think about our brain, our neocortex is really a small amount of processing device we have. Our sensors are so crude that we can barely see a very limited bandwidth of light. Our audio cortex is so crude that we can barely hear a very small wavelength of sound. Right. So if I were to tell you that I hear the Taylor Swift playing here, people will think I'm a cuckoo, I'm a crazy person because there is nothing playing here. But guess what? If you put a receiver, suddenly you can hear that song. So what is it? The sound is here. It's just that our audio cortex can't hear it. And anyone who can hear it, who's super enabled, we call them disabled because there's something wrong with them. Now imagine if we can upgrade our sensors to see all types of light, all types of sound. We are able to, in fact, have our sensors, that means our haptic sensors are improved. And suddenly our neocortex is unlimited because now it's connected to the cloud. What would that happen? Can we really be in, like my mom, one of the things my mom would always say, you can't be in two places at the same time. And because she felt that our sensors are what they are, she didn't realize one day our brain doesn't really know where information is coming from. What if it is asynchronously connected to multiple sensors? So I could be in Atlanta and Sydney and Seattle at the same time, smelling the cloud, touching the people, feeling exactly what it is. And our brain will not know the difference that I was not in Sydney, I was in Seattle, because there will be nothing different to our brain. It is like, going in a virtual reality and suddenly you find yourself in this world and you cannot walk because your brain is telling you, are you crazy? You're going to take that walk and die? Even though there's nothing there, but our brain gets easily fooled. My point is, ultimately, we're going to be able to do all these things by upgrading our sensors, upgrading our processing powers, and that will be an amazing utopian world where we could live.
Tim Boyle's just put into the chat, like Total Recall. It reminds me, I was very privileged one evening to have dinner with Neil Harbison, who is colorblind. And my question to him, and he has had an antenna melded into his skull so that he senses color. He can sense color. It transfers into musical notes for him. And I said to him, but wouldn't it have been much easier to have just corrected the color blindness? And he said to me, why on earth would I want to do that? I'll never need glasses. I see better at night. I love the way that I feel the vibrations of everything. And very much to your point, Naveen, about, that high sensitivity of the audio perceptions, which is a superpower really in itself. And he has what he considers to be a superpower as well. So how does all that relate in this utopian society that we want to build? Who gets to say what a superpower is, what a superpower isn't? Let's bring it back to White Mirror. In White Mirror, who makes the decisions? So if we're going to live in this utopian world that we all believe is possible, who makes the decisions? According to whose judgments, whose perceptions, whose experiences will we judge what utopia is? Can I open that up to you all for a comment?
That's a great question, actually. And I think we certainly want AI not to take those decisions the way it is now, because it is very biased in many ways, right? So I think it's going to be a new set of norms and a collective commons that will define how do we unbias the current AI sort of elements, and then how do we bring that, as you talk about humanoid aspects, together to make that. But it's a great question. I think I'd love to hear Naveen and Lisa.
So my perspective is just like today, the humans make choices. And I really think we should have an AI that gives essentially your perspective to that AI. That means your AI essentially takes your perspective and Lisa's AI takes the Lisa's perspective, and it behaves in the way that Lisa would, Lisa's value system and my value system. And we can all have our AI that essentially follows our own value system. And I think in this utopian world, it cannot be something outside telling us what is right or wrong, because then you essentially starting to say there is someone else passing a judgment. To me, the utopia is that you can create your own world that you think that you're imagining is that you want to live. And in that utopian world, you can't say, but Anuraj feels I cannot drink water because water is bad. And I was like, well, I want to create my world. The water is good, and I want to be able to drink that water, right? So I really think it'll be very interesting to see that. Are we going to be individualistic, or are we going to essentially live in this harmony where there is one world that we all believe in, or there's going to be somehow we're going to live in our bubble in a sense, just like today, there's some people who believe this is good and they don't want to hear anything else without it. And these people believe this is good and that's the world you create. Are we going to start to create these like-minded bubbles in the utopian world as well? And I think Lisa would love to hear what you think of that. And Anuraj, you.
Definitely. I know when we look at a lot of this, it always comes back to the human and individuals, because that's the world that we live in. But then secondary, how do we all coexist together? So I already know with my Aura ring, my readiness score for the day. And so I envisage in the future that, similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that the entire population have their base needs met. And I know currently at the moment, we've got so many people who don't have, we still have world hunger. We still have people without clean water and sanitization. And so in the future, we've all got our base needs met, and then we're able to get to self-actualization. And that's that point in time where we have the mindset where we want to give back. And so most conflict and fear, it comes from not having gaps or scarcity in some area of your world. And so if we can actually analyze on an individual level of where we have scarcity, is it health? Is it fitness? Is it friends and family? Is it relationships? Is it a sense of belonging? And then be able to support people to get to abundance in those areas so they want to give back. Fantastic. And so technology as a tool to augment our reality in the future. I imagine walking down the street and the city will tell when we're away from our baseline of happiness, from our micro expressions, and be able to support us with what we need when we need it. And in our homes, we've already invited robots in our home with Siri and Alexa and all the rest, that it's actually going to be augmenting us to be our best selves. And then the ripple effect from the human leadership that we show. So we all have an impact on ourselves, our immediate friends and family, our local community, country, world, and just depending on where we're at is the biggest impact that we can have. So it all comes back to the human for me.
Yeah, I think the way you said, Lisa, the baseline for happiness, I think once we know where that stands for society as a whole, and if we're able to quantify it with the right tech, and then amplify it, like Naveen said, obviously with the right sort of elements we can proliferate it with. But I think it's about when AI really becomes augmented intelligence and not artificial anymore. That's when we truly know that we're heading in that right direction. But I think it's how do we elevate happiness quotients overall? How do we eradicate poverty on that global scale? Democratizing tech for the deeper and meaningful impact and benefits, and democratizing knowledge and learning and the true wisdom that can sort of uplift everybody together. So I think that's what the UN SDGs are trying to do, to get everybody on the same page so that we leave no one behind.
So two comments about happiness, though. There's the Dalai Lama. I was in an audience with the Dalai Lama at one magical moment of life. And someone said to him, how do you keep a constant state of happiness? And the Dalai Lama's response was, you don't want a constant state of happiness, because then you don't actually realize what happiness is. What we strive for is a constant state of contentment, because happiness is something that fluctuates up and down, and therefore we understand what happiness is, and we get those moments of bliss. And the other thing I really love Mo Gawdat's equation for happiness, where he says happiness equals event without expectation. So I think it's that expectation, as we spoke about the other day, that creates that that either, you know, we love something that's happening, or because it doesn't meet our expectation, then we have a distaste for the end result potentially. So we've just got a few minutes left. Let's bring it right back to White Mirror and what White Mirror wants to achieve with the episodes that we're going to do. I think there's like, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 episodes that have just come out of this webinar itself. If we bring it all back, if we say, okay, utopia is all about, we've talked about the individual, we've talked about community, we've also mentioned the two words that we haven't mentioned today that we did mention in the pre-talk were self-empowerment. So what I'd love you all to just give maybe a tie-in scenario of how does self-empowerment, how does where we each individual want to take the collective good of a community to create a utopic scenario, a utopic life for us all, which may be individualistic, it may be community minded. What would be your final comments just for now? Because I actually would love to continue this conversation in another webinar further down the track. But how would you tie all this together, the tech, the self-empowerment, the responsibility, the happiness factors, utopia, White Mirror? Let's give our audience a final comment from all of you on what that might look like. And Lisa, I might start with you.
Oh, that was a really big question. For me, I think the most important thing is that we all show up as our best selves every day. And so that's going to give us the best opportunity to have the biggest impact on the future. And so absolutely, I'm a total fan, Naveen, if you can't tell already. I think the opportunity to know where we're at any time is so important. And in the next 10 years, we'll be able to do that every day in real time with the amount of devices and sensors we're going to have. Aura Ring, Viome, really show up. So personal leadership, show up as your best selves. And that's what's going to create that utopian future. Tech is always going to be a tool. So that's, for me, I'll keep it short.
Thank you. Anuraj?
Yeah, the past is history, the future is mystery, and the present is the gift. And I think it's about mindfulness and what we really need to bring about through conscious leadership and trying to make that difference, because every drop in the ocean can make that difference. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Naveen, let's have a closing comment from you.
Man, all I can say is that there has never been a better time to be alive. And anyone who is listening to this, know that White Mirror is happening for you inside your mind every day. So if you can create a white mirror for yourself in your mind, every one of us is going to be able to create a white mirror for the society. That means if we can start to believe in ourselves, we start to fall in love with ourselves, we start to believe that we are capable of doing that everything we imagine, I think we can create a world that we all can live in, not just for ourselves, but for our children and grandchildren. So to me, let's all focus on helping each other, making sure that every single day we focus on how many people's lives can we make better, and how many lives we can improve, and focus on contributing to everyone else's mission, because the whole world is going to then focus on helping you achieve your mission.
I love that. Thank you very much. I really would like to thank Rowan and Amber for being so active in the chat as well. Thank you all for joining us. We have many more hours of conversation around this topic, I'm sure, and I'd love to invite our panelists back on another day to continue the conversation. Please join us tomorrow morning for our Technologies of the Future webinar series hosted by my co-CEO, Lisa Andrews. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning will be on deck. Have a wonderful day, evening, wherever you are in the world, and let's all think about living in a state of kindness, respect, and unconditional love. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Anuraj, and thank you, Lisa, for inviting me here, and thank you for sharing these great opportunities.
Thank you so much, Naveen, Anuraj, Lisa.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Great pleasure.